Hiya, my name's Gregory from Totara. I'm here today to talk to you about Workato, specifically our newly released Totara Community Library Connector. So you can integrate with Totara sites. I'll be talking about what this is, how to find it, how to install it, and how to migrate over any existing recipes you may have already in your workspace. So what is a community library connector, and how does it differ from the connector that you likely already have in your Workato account? Well, if you've been using a Workato account managed by Totara prior to January 2026, it's quite likely you're using what we like to call a directly distributed version of our connector. What this means is that when your Workato account was set up, we either jumped in and set up this connector for you, or we have sent you the actual connector source code for you to install yourself into your account via this page we're looking at here, the connector SDK. Some of the drawbacks of having a directly distributed connector like this is that it's all manual. In order for someone to install this on their account, they would have had to contact Totara for us to send out the source code, and any updates or new releases of this connector, we would have to manually redistribute for you to install, which may cause breaking changes if you have any existing integrations using that connector. This is in contrast to the Community Library Connector, which I'm here to talk to you about today, which is available to be found under the Community Library under Custom Connectors by just searching Totara. And this has a bunch of benefits. Why are we migrating? Because by having it in the Community Library, it makes it much easier to find, discover, install, and use by all Workato users, those who work in a Totara managed account or outside of that as well. It is immediately available to all Workato users. It also makes versioning a lot easier. Updates can be published by us once whenever we are releasing a new version. And if you have the community library version already installed, you will get a notification saying that a new update is out, which is completely optional whether or not you want to opt in for that version of the update. Before we go any further, I'd just like to note that this migration to the Community Library Connector is completely optional. Your directly distributed version of the connector will still continue to work. It just won't be receiving any new functionality or bug fixes going forward. That will only be coming to the Community Library Connector. However, if this functionality or bug fixes are not necessary for your integrations, then this migration may not be necessary for you. Before we get underway, as with any migration, it's probably a good idea here to create some backups just in case a rollback is necessary. I would suggest making two backups, the first being the backup of the Totara site about to be connected to. Please see our Totara documentation on backups on how to do this. The second would be what Workato calls a recipe lifecycle backup of your current connector and any recipes you may have in case you need to roll back to them. This can be done under Recipe Lifecycle Management, under Tools, Recipe Lifecycle Management. Here you can export and create a zip manifest of the current state of your workspace and choose what to include. So how do we actually install this Totara Community Library Connector into our workspace? As I said, it's in the Community Library, discoverable on the left. Under Custom Connectors, you should just be able to type in Totara, and it should be the only connector there that pops up. Clicking into it, we can see all the triggers and actions available. You can even check out the source code if you wish. But you install it just by hitting the install button up at the top here. We say accept and install. And it's installed into our workspace. Note that you need to release a connector in order to use it in any recipes that we plan to migrate. So I'll do that in a second, but I'm just going to go ahead and rename this as the Community Library version, just so it's easier to distinguish from the connector that we already have. Now that it's renamed, I am going to release the latest version. And now this connector is ready to be connected to and then used in integrations. So now that we've installed this community library connector, you can see it here on the connector SDK page, the community library one that I've named next to the connector beta. We need a connection. So what is a connection? A connection is basically the authorization Workato uses to connect via the connector to your application of choice, in this case, a Totara site. Connections are associated with the connector itself, and since this is technically a separate connector, it requires a separate connection. On the connector SDK page specific to your connector, you can always set up the connection here. However, I am going to show you how to do this also through the projects page. I have a project here for the testing connector migration. If we click into here, sorry, I just moved my face. Click into here, you can see that I already have a connection for the distributor connector. Let's go ahead and create one for our new connector. So under create, we hit connection. And on this page, we should be able to search Totara, and we should be able to see the community library one we have named and already installed here. Clicking into it, it brings us back to this connection page. I'm going to jump ahead here and fill these out, but so you don't have to watch me type, but basically we have the base site URI of the site we're going to connect to, the client ID and secret of the external API client in order to connect to your site, as well as the Totara version of your site. This is important as it tells Workato and the connector what functionality is available to your specific site. Okay, cool. Now I've got those filled out. We've got the site URI, which is just an ngrok of my locally hosted site, the client ID and client secret as is configured on your Totara site under the external API client. If you don't know how to set that up, please check out documentation, as well as the Totara version. Here I've selected cloud just because I'm working on one of our main development trunks, but please select the Totara version, which is most appropriate for your site that you're trying to connect to. I'd like to note that this client ID and client secret, you can just use the same credentials as your previous connection if you had one. They connect to the same external API client on Totara side, so it should work without a problem. We're going to connect to this, and fingers crossed that this works. Great, we've got a successful connection established. And so basically this connector and connection is all ready to use to migrate some recipes. So let's get into it. Okay, migrating recipes. I've got a very simple recipe here that is triggered by whenever a course is added or updated to the connected Totara site. Whenever it picks up on that, it will enroll a user that I've specified into said course, and that is all that this integration or that this recipe does. Prior to doing any migrations, hopefully you will have already made a recipe lifecycle management backup, as I mentioned before, just to take a snapshot of your current connectors and recipes, just in case a rollback is necessary, but that's unlikely, as this is pretty straightforward. The first thing we're going to do is stop the recipe. That does mean that this recipe will have some downtime. However, once we migrate it over to the new connector and restart it, it should hopefully pick up any of the jobs that it missed in that downtime. So now that we can see that it is inactive, we're going to jump in and edit this recipe. Now, for every recipe that you're going to want to migrate, you're going to do this for each of them. You're going to come into the recipe editor, and again, for every trigger or action that uses the old connector, here we hover over this, we can see Totara connector beta, that's the old one. Same here. We can click into it and we can see the full setup, the full configuration setup for each trigger and action. It might be good to take note of this configuration here, because when we set it back up, we will need to reconfigure it in the same way in order to have the same functionality. So once you're comfortable with that, we're going to jump back into app. And here you can see that we're connected to the old one. We want to switch to the new connector. We're going to replace it with the exact same trigger, which is a new updated course. And we are going to use our new connection that we just made. Now we are going to reconfigure it with the same values. I only really care about getting all the fields from the course that triggered this trigger. Great. So that is the trigger all set up with the new Community Library Connector. Now coming down to the second action, which is enrolling the specified user in this new course. You can see that we have a warning here. It's also shown on the editor. This is because it was taking the ID value from the trigger as the ID of the course to enroll into. Since we've reconfigured that, this needs to be remapped or reconfigured, which is what we're going to do now. But basically, this action just takes in the ID of a user. I've got ID 4 for a user I've got configured on my site. And like I said, the ID passed from the initial trigger. We're going to, again, come back into app, switch from the old connector into the new connector, select the same action, which is to enroll a user in the course. And now we're going to go through that same setup. So user ID, my configured user, which is ID 4, and then the course. And we're going to use for the ID of the course, we're going to use the ID output from the trigger step. So that's there. And just so we have something to show for it at the end, I'm just going to get some fields to retrieve. Great. So before we save that and have it ready, let's test it. So we click this test recipe, and I'm just off screen. I'm going to run a quick script to create a fresh course. Just take note that when you run a test recipe, these are running, when you run a test job, it does run the full recipe, as in the triggers and actions, on the Totara site as well. Just be aware of that. So I'm going to run this script to create a course off screen. Great. And I'm going to check for it now. Hopefully this trigger catches it. Great. Successful. We can click into each step so we can see the trigger. See that this is my new course I just made called Workato Connector Migration Course. It's got ID 5 and all the other information. If we go into the action, we can see that as an output, the success true, great, and was already enrolled false. So we can see that it has successfully enrolled my user into this. We can also see in the inputs that the user was ID 4 that I specified, and the course ID of 5 came from the trigger. All right. So that looks like it's all set up and working correctly. We've tested it. We can go ahead and save it. And now that we've saved it, sorry, did that save? Yep. We can exit and restart the recipe. Great. This recipe is now fully migrated and ready to receive jobs as a working integration. As a final optional cleanup step, just so we don't get confused between our different connectors and connections, now that we've migrated everything over, we can go ahead and delete our former connection if we wish. So this is my new one. You can see here the old distributed connector connection. And you can check that it is 0 recipes, just to confirm that no recipes are used in this connection. The one that I've migrated is over here now. We can go here and click the 3 dots and click delete. Once you've done that, you can come over to the Connector SDK. The Connector SDK. We should see both, and you can go ahead and delete the connector from there as well, the old one, just so we don't get confused when creating new recipes going forwards. And that's all I have for you today. Hopefully pretty straightforward, but if you need any more detail, please see the PDF migration guide that we've sent out to partners, or feel free to reach out to us here at Totara. We're happy to help. Cheers.